The US military has been a consistent presence in the Caribbean for decades, but recent developments have raised questions about its role in the region. Just 4 months ago, the US military installed a radar system in Tobago as part of an initiative to fight narcotics trafficking and gun smuggling, especially related to Venezuela. The radar, which cost millions of dollars, was meant to enhance security, primarily by targeting illicit trade routes flowing through the Caribbean. But despite the removal of Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro earlier this year, which many believed would mark the end of the US military presence, US forces remain active in the region. This raises a key question. Why are the US military's assets still stationed in Trinidad and Tobago? And what does it mean for the island's future? In today's video, we're going to break down the ongoing US military presence in the Caribbean, its impact on Trinidad and Tobago, and how the involvement of neighboring Guyana is shaping the future of the region. We'll explore the political, security, and economic factors behind these developments and examine how small Caribbean nations like Trinidad and Tobago are navigating the complex web of US influence. Is it about security, or is there something more behind this strategic alliance? Stick around as we unpack what's at stake for the Caribbean and where things could go from here. In late 2025, the US military began installing a radar system in Tobago at the ANR Robinson International Airport, part of a broader effort to combat the rising threats of narcotics trafficking and arms smuggling in the Caribbean. At the same time, tensions with Venezuela had been escalating, with the US claiming that the Venezuelan government was a key player in facilitating illegal trade routes that impacted the entire region. The radar system, which cost millions of dollars, was supposed to be a temporary solution to these growing security concerns. But even after the US-backed operation ousted Nicolás Maduro in January 2026, the military presence hasn't been scaled back. The installation of the radar system in Tobago seemed to signal that the region was entering a new phase of security cooperation between Trinidad and Tobago and the US. However, what was meant to be a temporary measure has raised the question: has the US military presence become more permanent? Why are US troops still stationed in the Caribbean, and what's the true scope of their involvement? While Trinidad and Tobago is at the center of this growing alliance, neighboring Guyana is also playing a significant role in the broader geopolitical shifts in the region. Over the past few years, Guyana's oil boom has caught the attention of the US and other global powers. With newly discovered oil reserves potentially changing the economic dynamics of the Caribbean, Guyana has become a focal point for American interests, not just economically, but also strategically. Guyana's recent agreements with the US to join the America's Counter-Cartel Coalition further solidify the region's involvement in US-led security initiatives. This alliance is designed to coordinate efforts between the US and Caribbean nations to fight organized crime with a heavy emphasis on countering drug cartels and transnational criminal networks. However, the US's growing military and economic ties to Guyana, along with Trinidad and Tobago, have sparked questions. Is this really just about fighting crime, or is there a broader strategic agenda at play? The US is now more deeply involved in both Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, leveraging the region's geographical position and emerging energy resources as part of its larger geopolitical strategy. With Venezuela no longer the immediate threat, what are the real motivations behind the US military's continued presence? Back in Trinidad and Tobago, the public's reaction to the ongoing US military presence is mixed. On one hand, there are those who see the US as a much-needed partner in the fight against crime and drug trafficking, both of which have been escalating in recent years. But on the other hand, many citizens, particularly in Tobago, are questioning the lack of transparency regarding the government's agreements with the US opposition leaders, like Dr. Denise Sawyer-Fat Angus, have been outspoken about their concerns, calling for more openness about the long-term implications of the US military's presence. In Tobago, local fishermen are voicing frustrations over their safety, claiming that despite the US military presence, their boats and livelihoods are still at risk from illegal activities. One fisherman who wished to remain anonymous pointed out that even with the radar in place, recent incidents, such as a missing fishing vessel, suggest that the military's presence is not effectively addressing local security issues. This raises a bigger question. While the US military's role may enhance certain security measures, is it truly meeting the needs of local communities, or is it a symbolic gesture with larger geopolitical motives? The debate over national sovereignty is another significant concern. As Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana continue to strengthen their ties with the US, there are fears that smaller Caribbean nations could be giving up more than they're getting in return. For example, with agreements like the America's Counter-Cartel Coalition, there's an argument that countries may be trading their sovereignty for promises of security and economic aid. But what happens when these agreements involve military deployments that last longer than anticipated? Transparency remains a key issue. While the government insists that the US military's presence is purely to combat illegal trafficking and enhance security, some critics argue that these arrangements could evolve into a more permanent military presence with broader geopolitical objectives. The US has a history of setting up military installations around the world, and some are worried that Trinidad and Tobago may be becoming another cog in the larger US strategy, even if the local population doesn't fully understand the full extent of these arrangements. The US's continued military presence in Trinidad and Tobago and its growing influence in Guyana raise serious questions about the future of the Caribbean region. As small nations in this area navigate the complex world of global politics, they will need to strike a balance between securing their borders and maintaining their sovereignty. The Caribbean is no longer just a vacation destination. It's become a strategically important region for both the US and other global powers. While the US has justified its presence in terms of fighting drug trafficking and organized crime, there's an underlying tension between cooperation and independence. The US's long-term military presence in the region could reshape the political landscape, but at what cost? And as Guyana's oil reserves continue to attract global attention, will the region find itself caught in the crossfire of international interests? So what's next for Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana? The US military presence in the region is likely to stay for the foreseeable future, but the questions remain. Is it a security partnership, or is there a larger geopolitical game being played? And most importantly, how will these countries balance their security needs with the preservation of their sovereignty? These are the questions that need to be answered in the coming months, as both Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana navigate this delicate relationship with one of the world's most powerful military forces. As geopolitical dynamics in the Caribbean evolve, the people of these nations deserve transparency and clarity about their government's role on the global stage. So what do you think? Is the US military's presence in the Caribbean a necessary move to ensure regional security, or is it the beginning of a more permanent military influence? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more updates on what's happening in the Caribbean. As we wrap up today's discussion, the future of Trinidad and Tobago and the broader Caribbean region hangs in the balance. The US military's presence in the region may be positioned as a means to combat transnational crime, but there are still so many unanswered questions. Are these actions purely about security, or is this just the beginning of a deeper military and geopolitical engagement? As countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana align themselves with the US, they must carefully consider how these alliances